In this video, I'm going to show how you can process payments with Stripe Connect in your Bubble app, where you actually embed the Stripe payment form in your Bubble app. So let's say we wanted to hire Alex Jordan here for some video editing. And when we click on the purchase button, rather than be brought to a externally hosted Stripe payment page, we're actually going to stay within our Bubble application, but have the payment form be rendered within it. The customer can then make the payment and be returned to your application again. We're going to do this for both destination and direct charges. Okay, so just to set the scene, this demo app is a freelancer marketplace where customers can hire people to do jobs like branding consultation, app development, and then the payment is split using Stripe Connect between the platform and between the person who is providing the service. And the usual way that these payments are processed using Stripe Connect is someone clicks on a button and then the customer is brought to a Stripe hosted payment page. And you can see here, this is actually on checkout.stripe.com, and the customer fills out their details, and then the payment is split between the seller and between the platform. But we can actually embed this payment form within our app, so the user doesn't have to be navigated to this Stripe webpage. And what we can do is, if we just go to the button where this workflow is built, so this is the purchase button. So if I click on this purchase button, you'll see at the moment we have 4 steps. The first one is we're creating a new transaction, and in my data type, transaction is over here, and you can see there's 5 fields. There's the amount in cents, because Stripe always deals with cents, checkout session ID, payment intent ID, seller ID, really important. That's the unique account ID associated with the seller's Stripe account, and then status. Not all going to be relevant in every situation, but a good starting point for your transaction. Data type. So I'm setting the seller account ID. I'm creating a checkout session. I'm then taking some of the information from that checkout session, such as its ID and the amount, and I'm adding it back into the transaction data type. And then I'm navigating the user to the result of step 2, its URL. But let's say instead we want to embed that payment form within our Bubble application. What we can do is on this create checkout session action, which is part of the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin. So that's what I'm using for integrating Stripe Connect with Bubble. You can find it by clicking on add plugins and searching for Stripe Connect Marketplace. But once we have that, and once we have this action, what we can do is scroll down here, and you'll see there's a section called embedded checkout session. We can simply change this from no to yes. And then really importantly, if we change this to yes, we also have to add in this return URL. And the return URL is just where the user is going to be redirected to after they make the payment. So I'm simply going to put in website home URL. And then at the end of it, just to show that it's actually the return URL, I'm going to put in the URL parameter, return equals true. Now, if we are embedding the checkout session, we're not going to actually have it in an external website. So I'm going to delete this last action. I'm then going to go to the pages section here, click on new web page, and I'm going to call this embedded checkout. I'm going to copy it from just the about page, so I can delete a lot of the information and then quickly embed the checkout session. So we have this new embedded checkout session here. And like I said, I'm going to delete everything in here, delete that. So you kind of have a blank page. And let me just give this a min height so we can kind of see what's going on. And then what I can do is, because I've installed the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin, if I scroll down here, I have this embedded checkout session value. I'm going to drop it on here. I'm going to let it take up the full width, and I'm going to give it a min height of 600. And then I need to, on appearance, first of all, specify the charge type. This is super important, because back on our service page, when we're creating the checkout session, we're specifying the charge type here as destination. The charge type on the embedded checkout session must match the charge type here. So if I go back to the embedded checkout, I have destination, so that's all good. You will see there's another field here called seller account ID. That's important, but only if you're using a direct charge, which we'll come on to in a minute. You can leave it blank if you're just using a destination charge. Okay, let's navigate to this page. We're not fully there yet, but I think it's a good starting point. So let's go to our service page again. And on this workflow, instead of opening an external website, instead what we're going to do is we're going to go to page, embedded checkout. So let's run this. Let's hire Alex Cranford for €100. Click on purchase. And you can see we've been brought to the embedded checkout page, but nothing is happening. And that's because we actually need to load the embedded checkout. So let's start off by actually just adding a button that's going to do this. And then we can automatically do it on page load afterwards. So I'm going to drag a button up here. I'm going to call it load embedded checkout. Let's put it up at the top. That's fine actually. And then we can, again, because we've installed the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin, we have this action, load embedded checkout session. And the field we need to fill out here is client secret, which is a really sensitive piece of information. I wouldn't recommend saving this down to your database, but it's fine to use in this context. So what we're going to do is we're going to go insert dynamic data. We're going to get data from an external API. The API is going to be retrieve checkout session details. And then we need to define the checkout session we're getting details from. So back on the service page, we were creating a checkout session, but now we somehow need to access it. And I think the easiest way to do that is on the embedded checkout session page. If you click on it, you can set the type of content to be equal to transaction. And you might remember in our database, we've been saving down the checkout session ID to the transaction data type. So what we can do is we can say, if we are on the page, we're setting the type of content as transaction. We can say the checkout session ID is going to be equal to the current page's transactions checkout session ID. And then in this retrieve checkout session details, we can scroll down here and get the client secret. So I'm just going to refresh my page. I'm going to actually have to create a new checkout session again, because at the moment if we click this, nothing's going to happen. We're going to get an error because there's no transaction type on this page. So let's go back. Let's hire Alex for some SEO work again. Click on purchase. And we forgot one more thing, which is on the service page, we never actually sent data. I should have seen there's an error up here. The data we want to send is the transaction we're creating in step 1. So let's go back. Let's purchase one more time. And this time you can see on the embedded checkout, we're getting the unique ID of the transaction in the page URL, which means when I click on this, we're now getting our checkout session loaded, which is perfect. Now, we don't really want the user to have to click a button here because it's just not really a good kind of user experience. So instead of having a button to trigger that embedded checkout session, what we can do is we can simply add another workflow, and we can say, when the page is loaded, let's just copy this load embedded checkout session. And I'm just after losing that, bubble a bit glitchy today. But on this page is loaded, I can simply paste that in. I can delete the button related workflow. In fact, I'll just delete it entirely. And now when I create a new checkout session, it should load automatically. And I'm just going to fill in these details really quickly. We'll click on pay. We should be brought back to the return URL, which we are. And if we go into our Stripe dashboard, and if we go to transactions, and let's just refresh, we can see we do have that payment there for $100 that went through. And you'll see here we're getting charged some Stripe fees. we have the connected account, and we can see the collected fee that the platform gets is $20 less the Stripe transaction fees, with the remainder going to our connected account. And if we go down here, we can have a look at that connected account, which is Alex Cranford. Look at their payments. You can see there they got their 84 euros after all the application fees and the currency translation. Okay, so that's how you do it for destination charges. But let's say we're on our service page and we want to use a direct charge instead. And there's some good videos and documentation with the plugin that talk about when you should use direct versus destination versus separate charges and transfers. So if you're unsure, do look that up. But I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to click on direct. I'm then going to go back to my embedded checkout and I'm going to change this from destination to direct. And you may remember we've said if we're creating a checkout session using direct charge, you'll need to set the charge type to direct, which we've done, but we must also add the seller account ID in the below field, which we must do now. So what I'm going to do is, again, if I look at my transaction data type here and look at the most recent one, not that one, you'll see I'm also saving down the seller Stripe account ID here. So I can reference that from the transaction data type as well. I can say simply current page's transactions, seller ID. And then let's refresh. And this time I'm not going to purchase from Alex Cranford because he can't actually process direct charges. I've set his account up so he can do destination charges, whereas I know Alex Jordan I've set up to accept direct charges. So I'm going to add in debug mode at the end of this as well, because there's going to be one more thing we need to do. So let's click on that. Okay, so let's purchase to have video editing from Alex Jordan. We're being brought to the embedded checkout session page and we're getting an error here. And you can see this time the error is no such checkout session and then the checkout session ID. Now, you may be wondering why that error is occurring, because we created the checkout session. We're getting back what looks like a valid ID. But when we're using direct charges, the charge is made on the connected account. And that means we can't use retrieve checkout session details call. We actually have to pass through the seller account ID as a header when we're making that call. Now, fortunately, the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin lets us do that. What we can do is on page load, instead of using the retrieve checkout session details call, is instead we can use the retrieve checkout session details direct charge call. And you can see here we want to pass through the current page's transactions seller ID as a header. So that's the account ID of the seller of the service. So let's go back. And this time let's click on purchase again. And this time hopefully we should see the embedded checkout session loading successfully. And sure enough, it has. So again, this is a direct charge, so it will be made directly on the seller's account. I'm not going to go through actual making the payment in this case, but hope this has been useful in terms of understanding how to embed checkout sessions in your Bubble app for Stripe Connect.